Once again, we are back in the writing corner because why would we not be when we're talking about comics? So I kind of mentioned this in one of the previous videos. These Vita vlogs have just been jumbled together, so I don't know what video it was, but it did have to deal with a review or something of that sort. Maybe it was the Webtoons video, not too sure. But I mentioned in whatever video it was that I think it's time for one medium to die, and that is the medium of loose leaf comic books. Now, a lot of people know that I covered a podcast, a Batman podcast for a long time. We covered all things Batman, whether that be movies, comics, whatever, podcasts, and we covered everything. And in that podcast, I often talked about that I think it's time, because we would have discussions about how do you change the comic industry, how do you make the comic industry better, what do we think would get it to be on par, or at least try to compete more with the manga industry, which has been booming since COVID, literally saved Japan's economy, according to some articles. And I had the idea that it's time to get rid of loose leaf comic books. Now, I know a lot of hardcore comic book fans are going to call me an idiot or think I'm stupid or whatever because this is the OG method of reading comic books, and it's one of the best ways to read them. I will say, it is very nice to flip through a book like this, kind of like a magazine. I enjoy it, but the problem is after you read this thing, they are just awful to store. They are the worst type of medium to keep around. Like, I think, so first of all, let me finish my thought. I'll finish that thought. I'm sorry, I want to jump around. Sometimes I think things should go in order. This is why, if you watch any of my previous videos that are actually like written scripts, everything flows a lot better. But when you got Juice's brain that's crazy, I jump around a lot. These are terrible to store. Let's be real. It is just, if you care about comic books, and even if you don't care, terrible to store. If you care about comic books, you most likely will put this in a sleeve, and it has a bag and board. They call them bag and boards. You'll put it in there, and then you'll seal it up. And that way, it is going to stay in as pristine condition as you got it or as you put it in there. And that's where it's going to sit. And then, if you care about the comic, you're probably not going to reopen that bag and board because you're like, no, especially if you want to retain value, if you're one of those people. And it just sits in there. It's just on display. And that's it. Now, sure, I'm sure that they make something out there, or maybe you just buy a bunch of frames or something, and maybe you just flatten your comic in there and hang it on the wall. That would be cool. But you're not going to do it for, let's say if you were reading, Tom King's Batman run that has 100 issues in it, you're not going to do that. You're not going to have 100 Tom King Batman comics on your wall. That would just be really insufficient for space. You know what I mean? And some of those covers weren't great, let's be real. And so, yeah, this, you either put it in a bag and board and it goes in a box. That is the best way you can store comics, in my opinion, because it takes up the least amount of space. But then you have to go through there and be like, oh man, where's that one comic book? And what are you searching for? Are you actually going to pull it out and read it that way? I heard stories, because my co-host used to work at a comic shop. He said that people would buy 3 or 4 versions of the same comic book. They would buy one to bag and board. If it had an alternate cover, they would buy that one too. They would buy one to read, and then maybe they bought 2. I don't know. He said they would buy 3 or 4 different of the same book. And one was to read, one was to collect, and one was for something else. I don't really know. Maybe to sell. It's crazy. Crazy. You have to buy multiple of something because you're oh yeah, well I'm never gonna, storing these things are a bitch. And so I think it's pretty crazy. If you don't put them in bag and boards and you don't care about them, you're just gonna throw them on a thing like that, and then they start piling on each other, and eventually they start doing this. They start just bowling, and you're just okay, and then, again, if you want to search through comic books, you have to pick them all up and, surface through them, because there's nothing to read. You can't decide what the comic is through this, so it's just kind of terrible. Again, I love the way this is read. If you were to do this novelty-wise, every once in a while, if you did have free comic book day and you printed certain stories like this, that'd be great. I think that would be also a reason to get even more people to free comic book day. Or if you had like collector's editions of like old issues and maybe they're doing new art or new, covers or whatever for like a single issue, that would be kind of cool. But usually they do that more in like the graphic novel sense. But I want to get onto the main reason why I think we need to get away from this. And it's not just because of the story and all that, which I think is a big factor. But it's mainly because I think a lot of this is just a waste of paper and space. And, a lot of people, it's very hard to go into a comic shop and pick up a new book because you're just like, oh, they're already on issue 4 or 5 and they don't have issue 1 or whatever. I guess I won't read it. Like, it's very hard for somebody to go into a comic shop and pick up a new series in the middle, most of the times. At least, unfortunately, that's how it's been lately. Now, I don't necessarily believe the idea. A lot of people will be like, well, yeah, reading comics is so crazy because nobody knows where to start. I think you can suggest just a story of a superhero and people will start there. Like, I think that's the job of comic shop owners. Or just like you can search online and be like, what's the best comic book to read of Batman? And pick the first one that you see pop up and read it. And if you like it, you like it. If it's Batman, I will always say Hush as being the go-to story to read because I think that was amazing. But yeah, so I think that's a really like intimidating thing is when you go into a comic shop and there's just so many different things to pick from because it's all like, people are basing it off the cover art and everything like that. And you're like, oh, should I start reading this? Do you have number 1? Sometimes number 1's not there, and you're like, oh, well, that sucks. Like, and I don't think anybody's gonna want to read like issue 4 or 5. Like, you don't want to start there. So that's a problem, in my opinion. And also, secondly, I think people, I think it would probably be hard at the start, right? Because I don't know how much it costs to print one of these. I don't know if it's like they're selling them. Depending for like $5, something like that sometimes, depending on the maker, the story, the character, anywhere from like $3 to $4. I know a few years ago, DC went back down to like $2.99, but I think it's up again, so it's probably closer to $5, maybe even more now. I stopped buying comics years ago because they were taking up too much space. I have like 5 or 6 just stacks of not even more. I have these down here. I literally have, I don't know if you can see it, but there's literally a box right there full of comics holding up my manga. There's another one on the other side. And yeah, and then I have like 6 boxes outside this room. It's crazy. Like, it's just so much space, and I couldn't even tell you what I have in there. It's a majority of Batman, but like, there's a lot of crap in there. And I've never taken them out of the bags and boards and read them. And I think, this style of comics, like just constantly producing like this, it's not a good way to get people to jump into the medium. I think, and I know people are going to fucking hate when I say this, what you have to do is if you are going to do weekly stuff like this, it needs to be digital. And I know people hate digital. They're like, no, digital, I don't want my books there. Look, man, Shonen Jump has shown that the model of digital works. Now, if DC wants to go and do something different and still produce something like this, then make DC Jump Magazine or whatever. Call it whatever DC the hell DC is going to call it, Marvel's going to call it. And if you still want to print something that people can read physically week to week, put out a book. Put out a big-ass book like the freaking manga people do, and do that. And that's what people can pick up weekly if you still want to drop something. And that way, people get to read a bunch of stories at one time instead of freaking, oh yeah, I gotta buy like 10 different things to read 10 different stories. No, just buy the massive book, and that is the only thing you sell physically, obviously, aside from graphic novels and trades and all that jazz. That is where I think they should shift most of their market, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that's where they make a majority of their money anyways, so why not put more effort into that, design better covers, better layouts and all that kind of jazz. And also, unfortunately, I think a lot of that comes from also reselling the same stories over and over and over with just prettier packaging, which kind of sucks. I could be wrong on this. My co-host works at a comic industry thing now, so maybe he probably knows more about this. He can correct it in the comments if he wants to. But I'm pretty sure that is somewhat accurate that I just said. But I do think the digital model is where it's at because look, man, as I film this video, the economy is going down and up every single day, and it's harder. People can barely even afford food now, so they're not going to be able to afford comic books. So I think the industry needs to change. I've talked about this in a lot of those podcasts. The reason why manga is so popular is everybody can pick up a story and they know where it starts and where it ends because there is no new writers that jump on to stories like after like 50 issues. It's the same writer majority of the time, unless, somebody passes away or something like that. A majority of the time, you are getting the same writer for the whole run, which is pretty great, especially if you like the story, you know it's going to be consistent. And that's what people enjoy. But you can see it every time Batman gets a new writer. People just hate the new writer. If you love Scott Snyder, you hated Tom King. If you like Tom King, you hated James Tynion. If you like Tynion, you probably hated Chip Zdarsky. It just changes a lot. Actually, I think there was somebody between Chip and Tynion for like 4 issues, and that was it. But even that run sucked too at the end, I think. But I already forgot who that was. But yeah, so like stuff like that, it's very different. But if you were to go to a digital only model and you had a cheap price, don't try to Netflix the hell out of this. I think if you made it affordable for a while, maybe if you do know that you need to go up in price, like this thing needs to be $8, because I think DC currently has something in place right now that's like $8, maybe even more, and you get like the comics a week after, if I'm not mistaken. They might have something like that. Maybe you could swing the $8 a month. Maybe that is not bad. I don't really know. Somebody, if you subscribe to that, let me know if you think it's worth it. But I think the reason they do that, you get it a week after, is because they need to sell these things, right? They need to sell these floppies, and that's why you're not getting it the week of. Dude, just nix the floppies and just drop the comics the day of so people can read them. And have your app and promote your app everywhere and promote it in the new graphic novels that you drop and all that jazz, and then really just focus on the novel aspect, because this looks so much better on a shelf or on display than this. Like, it just doesn't look as great, you know what I mean? Like, because it's, it's a floppy. Nobody cares. Okay, people care, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just not efficient anymore. And I know some people, everything doesn't have to be efficient. Sure, for sure. But look, man, my thing is, I want the comic industry to be booming again. You know what I mean? I want to see that one day. I want it to see on par. I want people that love manga to also love comics, like hand in hand, and be like, you have to decide like what they want to read that week. You know what I mean? But you wouldn't have to if everything was digital, or there was an app like Shonen Jump, or, whatever DC's is called, and you were just able to afford that monthly, read the books, and then buy what you liked when it came out later, right? And I'm sure that those things have metrics to where they're able to see like, oh, we should drop this book faster or whatever. I don't know. I think also if you have to stop worrying about producing this, I'm pretty sure it's different companies that produce everything, or maybe it's not. I'd have to ask my friend, to be honest. If you stop worrying about this, you can probably put all the production that goes into these into making the graphic novels faster, the same way that manga drops volumes for their stuff. But it is something I stopped buying comics a long time ago, man, because it's just, I hated the waste of space. I hated how they weren't on display. And it's very, like, sometimes I do want to read these books again, and I don't like the idea of owning all these floppies and then like, oh yeah, if I want to just have a better reading experience, I need to buy it physical in a book. And I'm like, I might as well just wait for the book. Like, you know what I mean? And I think that's how a lot of people feel. And I don't know. I just think it should be changed. Or, here's the thing. If you don't want to go the digital route, which is totally fine, just start dropping books in 6-issue volumes. Like, just start doing that. Just start dropping a volume of Batman. Now, that's a little bit more of an investment. You're going to have to take a chance with the writer and hopefully make sure people are going to enjoy that writer and trust in their writing for that 6 issues. You're basically dropping probably an arc per book. That's how it would be in comics, because a lot of arcs are anywhere from 3 to 6 issues most of the time. At least, I don't know, maybe it's different nowadays, but that's kind of how I remember it being. And it's like a volume. That's usually a volume. Scott Snyder's definitely follows that. So I would go like that. I think that's the way you kind of change it. And I think it's probably better for writers anyways, because they know how to write that way, opposed to being like, oh crap, I gotta hurry up because we gotta get this thing to printing and we gotta get these floppies out in the art, blah, blah, blah. I think it would be better in the long run, but I don't know. I could be talking out of my ass. If you are a comic book artist, let me know. Or writer, I should say, as well. If you think that is better. But personally, I think the age of the floppies should be phased out. I think you do it for special events. Maybe, you know, you do it for things like at comic shows or whatever. Like, you know, oh, this is a special so-and-so or a special cover of this particular issue and blah, 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 blah. I think that would be kind of cool because then it adds more value to that particular thing because you could only get it at the comic show and all that jazz. But I don't know, man. I've been wanting to... I've talked about this a million times. I've never made a full video on it. I would have probably made a more polished video about it, but it probably would have died in the sauce of everything else I was making anyways. So it felt like a perfect time to talk about it in Vita. But yeah, death to Floppy. I'm on that train, still on that train. I love the way to read them like this, but yeah, I only read it once and then I'm done. If you're somebody that reads floppies all the time, let me know how you store them. Do you actually store them in bag of boards? Is there a better way to store floppies that can actually look nice on a shelf or something like that? I've never seen it, so let me know what you do to do that, how to defeat that. But for the most part, yeah, that's the rant I got today. I think the comic industry needs to change. It needs to do something different because I want to see people thriving, and I want to see little nerds on the street again reading comic books. But obviously, it's probably not going to be this way. Unless it's Free Comic Book Day, which I think everybody should go do that. Or Batman Day. I feel like a lot of people do that. But yeah, death to Floppy, and I'll see you in the next one.